Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last panel of the evening for Onyx Path Con. My name is Jacqueline Bryk. You may have seen me around the internet as Jax Hermana or Rufflejax, and I will be moderating this phenomenal panel on the Chronicles of Darkness. Before we get started on talking about the sort of what you may think of as the new World of Darkness, or that game series that I don't want to play because it's not Vampire the Masquerade, I would love to introduce you to some of our lovely panelists. Let's start with Renee, and then we'll go to Eric, and then we'll go to Joshua.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jax. Hi, I am Renee Ritchie. I've written for various Chronicles of Darkness properties, going all the way back to, oh gosh, it's been a minute. Beast the Primordial, Demon, Dark Eras, and most recently the Geist Fiction Anthology. You can find me around the internet as Hedgie Cleric. You may see me in the chat.
I'm Eric Zawadzki. I've been a freelancer, started writing for during the end of First Ed Mage, The Awakening. So I've been around the block a little bit. I've done a lot of Demon, done a bit of Mage, done a whole lot of, well, I'm the line developer for Deviant the Renegades, and currently developing a couple projects for the Hunter Stretch Goals.
Hello, I'm Joshua Doetsch. I am 4 months into being a new parent, so I'm slightly feral still. I only regained the power of speech about a half hour ago. I write for some video games. I write for tabletop games. In relation to Chronicles of Darkness, I wrote on the core book for Vampire the Requiem 2nd edition, as well as Secrets of the Covenant, I think it's called. And I've also done a bit of fiction, including my novel Strangeness in the Proportion, and a Deviant novella, and a short story in Vampire the Requiem.
Fantastic novella, in fact.
Thank you.
I am really excited to read it personally.
Oh, it was so fun. It was right. It was just right in the zone for the game. I loved it.
So before we get into questions and chatting about how much we love the Chronicles of Darkness so much, just a couple of housekeeping things. If you would like to ask us a question, please use your channel points to highlight it in the chat, so either me or our fearless producer Travis can read and send them to us, and we'd be happy to answer your questions at any point. Please do not send us questions about announcing things or the future of the Chronicles of Darkness. We are mostly freelancers, as you've seen, and we are on this panel because we want to talk about the things we've worked on and our love for the setting and the various game lines. We cannot tell you any super secret plans. We cannot tell you about Rich's 5D chess game. Shit, ignore that. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. So Chronicles of Darkness is, I think, in a lot of ways very different from the World of Darkness. To me, it feels a little more sort of Kafka-esque, like more clean lines, sharp surfaces, etc., than the World of Darkness, which feels very Baroque and complicated and maximalist almost. What drew you guys to working on the Chronicles of Darkness? What's sort of your favorite tonal or mood note?
I think for me, one of the things that I particularly like about Chronicles of Darkness compared to other similar horror game lines is that it has an opportunity to touch the personal notes that aren't necessarily horror. They can really dive into some of the deeper relationships, and there's room for that, and it actually makes space for it in a way that may be discouraged in other games. I've had some, as a player in Chronicles of Darkness games, I've actually had some of the more poignant personal role play moments and really like deep feels punching storylines in any sort of tabletop game, specifically in Chronicles of Darkness games, in ways that the setting actually allowed for and encouraged. I loved it.
Well, for my own part, I love the setting regardless, but I think the thing that keeps me drawn into the Chronicles of Darkness is that it has a lot of fun mechanical levers to pull. I can do stuff that makes the horror come across mechanically in a way that was really hard to do in World of Darkness. You kind of had to make, I wouldn't say make your own fun in World of Darkness, but it was a lot more limited in terms of how much mechanical stuff was in it to play around with. So I enjoy getting into the guts of the systems and making them lay out on the table like an autopsy, and figuring out how they work and how to get them to do what I want them to do.
Almost the exact answer I expected from the Debian developer. Josh?
I think for me, when the New World of Darkness book originally came out, the core book, the draw for me was there was really a sense of, you had your normal supernatural splats, your vampires, werewolves, and mages, but there was just this sort of mysterious miscellaneous category. It's this Twilight Zone kind of weirdness that you could have in the original World of Darkness. Usually things were explained into different categories. This myth is actually a werewolf spirit. This is actually a Methuselah vampire. Whereas in the World of Darkness, there was just I loved being able to just throw things that the players had no idea what this was, and there was a sense there's a real sense for the normal supernatural splats to be afraid of the dark too. Like they're just a little concerned about what's kind of at the raggedy edges of things. And then writing it, the thing that got me in was actually I got in on Vampire Requiem 2nd edition. I came in as a longtime Masquerade fan, but what drew me in was Rose Bailey's kind of Bible for what she wanted to. She had just a razor sharp vision of what she wanted for the 2nd edition of that game, and it really drew me in. A very noirish and personal kind of setting. And separating it a little bit further from the sort of monolithic Masquerade kind of mythos.
I love that. Speaking of mechanical levers and the sort of weird noir feel of the Blue Book, or the Big Blue Book, as we like to fondly call it here, I know that I got really hooked on Chronicles of Darkness when I first read the God Machine story. And I am so happy that we've made the God Machine story a central part of the mythos. If Chronicles of Darkness could be said to have a meta plot of any kind, what is your guys' take on the God Machine Chronicle?
I wrote the infrastructure mechanics and stuff in Demon way back when. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the God Machine, and I love the fact that they kind of played around with it even further in Contagion Chronicle in certain ways. It's such a great meta villain. It's like Cthulhu without the baggage of Cthulhu, of H.P. Lovecraft's problems, racism, and it's just makes such a fascinating antagonist that just, I don't know, isn't out to get you. It's just there. It's a force of nature. It reminds me a little bit of Babylon 5, where there's that moment where there's, I'm trying to remember this just a long time ago that I watched this, but there was this moment where they encountered something that was just bigger than they could comprehend. And, the Vorlon was just like, this is the way life is sometimes. Sometimes there's just stuff that's just bigger than you can comprehend. And that's the way you just deal with the fact that exists and it's out there. And it's just a really interesting hook. And I know that there are some people that are really don't like the God Machine, but I'm a big fan of it. I find myself using it in the games I run all the day on time, to the point where my players are just waiting for me to give in and include it.
As someone else who's also worked on Demon the Descent, I am also a fairly big fan of the God Machine. For a lot of the reasons that Eric specifically put forward, it basically kind of gives this concept of divine power without it being bogged down by a lot of, existing cultural references. And it's also a really interesting commentary on technology, especially as things like artificial intelligence and basically constant data surveillance really becomes, a reality. And it points out the dark sides of that. And I think potentially even some of the folks who play those games really kind of, either don't have Alexa in their house or, look at it very, very suspiciously when they do. Like more so than, people who actually work in tech and understand the technology that goes behind it. And it's not necessarily anti-technology either. but I've always really appreciated and admired the way it played with that particular type of power. And it didn't really get bogged down with one particular faith being like the one true way, as
Yeah.
and it's kind of freeing, and it makes it a lot more accessible to folks who may or may not have, those cultural touchstones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I see it as
I,
very, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say I didn't work on anything with the God Machine directly, but it really stuck out to me even in that first edition when it was just that, I think that one little article. It made sense that it was broadened in the second edition as just God as a cosmic horror is just great, and it's a great thing because it looms over the whole setting, but it's the easiest thing to ignore if that's not your jam, if you don't want the techno horror there, you can ignore it, you can put it in, you can ignore it and then put it in, and it's just a great presence that further separates Chronicles of Darkness as its kind of own entity.
100%. I wound up, for Vampire the Requiem second edition, wound up writing a bloodline that were specifically devotees of the God Machine, and all of their disciplines involve working with infrastructure and transmissions, and it was a really super fun, sort of weird, hyper-focused bloodline to write. Check that out in Night Horror Spilled Blood if you're interested. Let's see. So we talked a little bit about theme and mood. We talked a little bit about the God Machine. One of my favorite things about the Chronicles of Darkness books are the theme and mood sections at the beginning of every book. I think Chronicles of Darkness is the first line I've ever seen do that. Like, this is what your game is. This is explicitly what this game is about and how your game should feel, and like just sort of keep these in mind. How do you guys feel about like the theme and moods? Do you adhere to them when you're writing? Do you sort of take them as a guideline? Do you have a favorite set that's been put out? Like, I know for me, my favorite theme and mood sections were the Changeling, the Lost, because you're playing with diametrically opposed themes and moods, and the space that you are supposed to be living in with Changeling the Lost is that tension in the center. But if you guys have any other like favorites, I would love to hear about them.
I'm going to be totally honest here and say that I didn't do the homework on this one.
That's okay.
But at the same time, I do appreciate that because it makes sure that you have at least a foundation, like a cornerstone to, build the kind of stories that fit well within the world. And as far as theme, and then for the mood, it kind of gives you the aesthetic. And, you and I are all about the aesthetic. So, it's a thing. Mm-hmm. And it's such an important thing to think about as we go along, to really kind of make sure that, as we're building these things out, that, we have something that will resonate not only with people who want to play these games, but also with the people who created them. I may be a little biased on that because, well, I've written for this stuff too. It looks like we got a new subscriber.
We did. Thank you, Trudaki7. I'm going to assume it's pronounced Trudaki and not Trudake, but we're gonna give it a shot. Joshua or Eric?
Yeah, when I wrote, I think the first thing I worked on for Chronicles of Darkness was my novel Strange in the Proportion, and I felt it gave me a lot of freedom to kind of do my own thing while still being in that world. But when I worked on Requiem, I think that's the most in lockstep I've felt kind of with a developer's kind of a vision and through line through that. And I think Rose and I both connected on the just the noir references and the short story I wrote for that in the Chronicles of Strix anthology. Of anything I've wrote, I feel like that's my most successful like noir thing. Not necessarily the trappings like fedoras and shadows and cigarettes, which are great, but it's more about just the why normal people do terrible things or just get caught in these sort of situations, and it has a kind of seedy feel that kind of fit the setting Bible that she kind of set down, and yeah, I was very much living in those themes when I was writing that.
I love the fact that they're there, and I feel like they tend to make a nice starting point around which you can build other stuff to go along with it. Um, I loved what, and this I remember this started with Demon, the like you know smooth and rough and um, quiet and loud, the different axes when you're thinking about, okay, here's how we're going to present the game. We're going to present this really strong. Those first two chapters are just going to be like you're gonna know what it means to be a deviant. You're gonna know what it means to be a demon. You're gonna know how it feels to be a mage. Who are these people? What kind of things are interesting to them? What kind of like things like just tear at their souls? Other than the thorns or whatever happened to the deviant. But then we're going to go into the storyteller section and go, okay, looking at all of that, this is your game. Here are some other things you can do with it that are really close to fitting that, but are a little bit more focused in different directions. A body-focused game is a different game than a mind-focused one. A flying game is a much different game than a grounded game. And like even like the tiers in Deviant, I mean, like a two, the standing one game, and believe me, I don't have all the. I believe it or not, I don't have the standing numbers all memorized, despite having developed this game. But I think if you think about it from standing one to standing six, a standing one game is a very different feel from a standing three, which is, I don't know, kind of my default, the 7 dots, 7 magnitude of variations, versus a 15, which I kind of think of as Gonzo, because it gets really wild. And everyone's scars are just going crazy, and the variations are really hard to deal with as a storyteller sometimes because everyone has so many of them. But there are different ways of playing the same game, but it does start with that theme, that mood, this sense that this is what this game is about.
Awesome. So we've asked some general questions. I want to, because we all sort of specialize in different areas, I'm going to ask some panelist specific questions. So I want to start with Renee here. What you mentioned that your last work with the Chronicles of Darkness was on Geist?
Yeah.
Right. What sort of drew you to Geist? What made you want to play and write in that setting?
So when a lot of the initial conversations about kind of the second editions of a lot of these games were really starting to come forward, somebody that I'd worked with on previous projects, Travis Stout, said, I really want to do a second edition for Geist. And he said, and I want you on it. And I literally said, I have never played Geist in my life. I don't really know a whole lot about it. And he's like, that's why I want you in there. Fast forward to when I was actually called upon to write for the Geist fiction anthology, and I still hadn't gotten a chance to play it, but I knew enough people who had played it previously and, talked with them at length about what they enjoyed about the game. Obviously, I read the core book to understand what I was getting at. And there are definitely like a lot of different themes, but it's still kind of very, even with all of these very spooky things going on, it's still kind of very rooted in the human experience. And I was basically able to use that to kind of talk about the kind of the origin story of what turned out to be a very powerful Geist with the story Lost at Sea. So that was really kind of what ended up drawing me specifically to this project. And honestly, I would love an opportunity to play some Geist. Nobody in my play groups is really interested in playing it. So if you have a Geist game that has a free spot, somebody let me know.
So what did you sort of end up vibing with the project while you were working on it? Like, I haven't read Lost at Sea. So what is something you would like to tell people who are sort of new to the fiction of Geist? What would you want people to focus on?
I think one of the big things that at least for me, that I would love for people to focus on is kind of that individual relationship between the person and the Geist that is attached to them. I mean, if you really want to go with like a comic book comparison, it's almost Venom, but not quite. as far as it's kind of a symbiotic relationship as far as, you know, what each of these two entities are kind of looking for. But at the same time, it can cause all kinds of trouble and complications, but it's definitely a little less violent or gonzo. It's definitely going to be a little bit more internal. And personally, that's what pulls my attention. I like kind of going into the more complex, nuanced kind of conflicts and complications that can come through some of these stories.
Awesome.
But that's just me.
So we had a question earlier, and I'm going to ask all of the other panelists this question as well, because I thought it was a really good question, because somebody got smart and decided to ask not what's coming out, but is it cool to ask hypotheticals about what panelists would do if they had the opportunity? So like, if you had an opportunity to work on any of the Chronicles of Darkness games, put anything into a Chronicles of Darkness line, or into the sort of the core Mortal line, like, what is something you would want to add or work on or even take out?
I'm going to admit I'm hooked on Deviant at the moment. I'd love to write a player's guide. I'd love to write.
Eric, this question is for Renee. I'm asking
I'm sorry, I
all the panelists this
apologize.
question in turn. Thank you.
Okay.
Honestly, I'm more than okay with Eric jumping in there because I'm going to need to think about this one. Come back to me.
All right.
So Eric, thank you for the save.
Well, then I'm going to move to Eric then, and then Eric can have a little more time to think about that question, because I want to ask him about Deviant.
Okay.
So I worked on Deviant with Eric, as he knows.
Mhm.
I've read many of Eric's comments on my Deviant writing. And I love the core themes of Deviant. I love how the book treats them, and I love how this is very much a game about, to me, very much a game about disabled and institutional rage. What sort of drew you to working on Deviant? What drew you to taking up the developer mantle on this project?
What fascinated me about Deviant is that despite, you know, here's the cool powers, whatever, were the scars and that sense of loss. You can certainly, people have brought up the disability rage or chronic illness rage, but just even myself getting older, like some of the frustration of things that that I can't do now that I used to be able to do. Some of them are simple, regard whatever, but when people talk about, and this is one of those things that they always tell you when you're a young writer, write what you know, and kind of what they don't tell you is that you have to take a little bit of experience that you have with something and you kind of escalate it or take it to logical conclusions through imagination. And so you're taking stuff like, wow, it's really hard to sleep, like really sleep in anymore. I wake up a lot earlier than I used to, and it's not because I always want to. Now let's take that to some extreme and say, okay, you just are exhausted all the time. And for me, a lot of it was this sort of the horror of, this is a thing that you like, this is part of your identity that you're losing. That fascinated me. The idea of like, that first play test, the basketball player who loved playing basketball, now he can't even walk up a flight of stairs without getting winded because divergence. Or the woman who loved going to the beach, and that was just her thing, was going to beaches and being out in the sun and the wind and the sea, and suddenly having a bane of not being able to be in the sun without like literally being burned to death slowly. And that's sort of it's not just, wow, these people hurt me, but these people hit something that was really fundamentally part of my identity. And this was one of those things, like when we were experimenting with variations and scars, and I was like, okay, what's fascinating about it is the scars, the physical scars, you benefit mechanically. Your variations are more powerful if you have a lot of physical attributes and a physical scar. But if you, so your choice is either, but it messes around with your physical stuff. So like if you have high strength, high dex, high stamina, that's all well and good. but if you, gosh, I'm kind of kind of rambling here. I apologize. But it fascinates me that like what you are best at, the scar that you pick takes away what it is linked to. So if you are wanting to have the best physical variation you can, something that fuels off your strength, stamina, and dexterity, in order to do that, you have to pick a scar that's going to hose you really hard physically. You're going to be like, you're going to bleed easily. You're going to bruise easily. You're going to not have as many health levels. You're going to have trouble getting up a flight of stairs. There's going to be all sorts of things that you're just weak at in that way. So it like tied in mechanically to what I was already fascinated with, like in terms of the tone, the theme of this loss of who you are, and not just the loss of humanity. Like, okay, now I'm a murderer, but like something I used to love, something I used to be good at, something that I considered a part of my identity is taken away from me forever. And boy, I wonder why I'm so mad at these people who did this, or who want to like use this effect on me, and make me use my abilities, because this is not something I wanted. This is not something, even if it was something I thought I wanted, it was something I lost something in the as a cost of this. So.
And what do you think is so interesting about exploring that theme of loss when you are playing essentially a very broken sort of superhero? Because I've heard people say that they think Deviant looks like a Champions game or looks like a hero system game, and then they read it and they're like, that is nothing like what I thought it was going to be. So what do you think sort of is appealing about playing that sense of loss while also having that ability to have the higher power level?
I think and I talk about this quite often in the Discord, is one of the things that fascinates me is that the mechanics support the narrative play. So in order to, if you're there to play the story, it's not going to get in the way of the story. It'll have some mechanical advantages, whatever, but that's not really why you're there, right? I mean, there's some people that are just very fundamentally interested in, wow, this is the story I want to tell, and this is what I want to get into. But it also takes the person who kind of likes the cool powers, and it kind of makes them responsible for their own loss of their further slide. Because in order to get more variations, wow, cool powers, get more variations, bad stuff has to happen to your character. Your scars have to get in the way. You have to lose someone who you care about, or let someone go that you want to destroy. And so it gets you through the narrative, or it gets you through mechanics, but it's going to get you, and it's going to make you tell that story, but like really encourage you to tell that kind of a slow slide away from who you were and into what you're becoming story.
That's awesome, first of all. Second of all, even though I've written for you a couple of times on Deviant now, I have only ever played Deviant one-shots. And so we came into the one-shot with a character that was built, all of their divergence. How would you tell a story of people getting more variations and more scars? Would you have to undergo something like more tests, more divergence, or is that something that could pop up naturally? Like, what do you think would be the ideal story process for doing that?
Well, I think to a certain extent, the table can determine that, but my experience has been, you don't need to give them more tests. The divergence itself is such an unnatural and unstable position that just having this continue to wreck your life makes it worse. Your soul it isn't, you take a hammer to the windshield and it breaks and it's all in pieces and there's nothing left. It's, you hit it with a rock and it cracks just a little bit. And then the longer you leave it, the bigger that crack gets. And it's that dread of eventually that windshield's going to fall out, and it might fall out when I'm on the highway. But it's, I did actually run an actual play for more than a year in the first year of quarantine.
Good time for it.
Yeah, well, we wanted to be playing something, and that seemed like, and Travis and the gang wanted to have some content for people to see when they were all so bored at home for the most part. So yeah, I ran an actual play for I think 26 sessions, and we did have some increases of variations over the period of that. And I mean, I remember one of them was one of the characters had a friend who was a cop, one of his loyalty touchstones, and was a police detective, and he kind of like put his friend on the path to chasing after a particular conspiracy, hoping that maybe he would unearth something that would, get rid of the conspiracy. But it put his friend in harm's way, and his friend was murdered horribly as a result of that. And that was, from a character perspective, just absolutely devastating. And like he ended up picking up a new scar from that. And having all sorts of like additional abilities too, but had a new scar as a result of that. My player is very much loves the benefit, the power side of games. But he was like, it's kind of weird. I feel kind of weird because I know that I'm kind of mad that you killed this character that was close to my character, because we developed him over the course of much of this year. But also kind of excited because now I get to play this character who just has a little bit more power too. So I don't think there's a problem with letting people have more of those abilities. That's what we spend experience for. That's what it represents. But in Deviant, it does represent kind of just more a further destabilization if you're using it to buy more variations and pick up more scars.
Right. So I could talk Deviant all night because I have many thoughts about how it's sort of the almost industrial version of Changeling the Lost, which is a game that is very near and dear to my heart. But I will give you two more short questions, and then we'll move on to Josh, who has been waiting so patiently, and I appreciate that. Deviant seems like it could fit with a lot of the other Chronicles of Darkness games, and while it's not necessary that you bring them all together in a big meta plot, which other splats would you say play nicely with Deviant?
Oh man, boy. They link up in different ways and for different reasons. I mean, I can see them getting along really well with some hunters and being the first thing that the baby hunters are shooting at, because they are so obviously the monster. I can see them being taken under the wing of a really not very nice beast who's encouraging them to embrace this horrible thing that's happening to them, and that being a really destructive but also interesting dynamic. When I did my actual play, we actually had a demon involved because I loved the reason that they were had all diverged was because they had been exposed to some infrastructure, and it was just a side effect of the infrastructure. It wasn't anything that God machine attended. It was like the radioactive decay that just happened to be in the building that they lived in, which the conspiracy had figured out how it worked and was now using to deliberately diverge people by putting them in the proper units. And so they had a demon there who was like trying to mess around with that infrastructure. So kind of befriended them sort of, but really had his own goals too. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic as well.
And if you could add anything to the Chronicles of Darkness, what would you add?
Like I said, I would love to have an opportunity to do Player's Guide. I mean, just like the standard Player's Guide, Storyteller Guide, Night Horrors. I can think of so many things that I'd love to see in those, and I'm sure that there are writers out there that have their own ideas that would be great too.
Okay, I'm gonna jump back to Renee real quickly before we go to Josh. Renee, same question. If you could add or remove or change anything about the Chronicles of Darkness, what would that be?
Sorry, I was muted. I think for me, I would like to see potentially some adaptations of some of the older things that actually worked really well from first edition from some places that would come into second edition. I personally have a soft spot for the Callisti bloodline of the Deva from Vampire the Requiem. That was the very first vampire character, Requiem character that I actually enjoyed playing. And it wasn't because of the perfidy. It was because of a lot of the, disconnects that came from, basically having to set up an entirely different infrastructure for yourself because one key element of how vampires keep themselves alive didn't really work. They can't form blood bonds. I enjoyed it so much to the point that I actually have a tattoo of the lily of the Callisti artwork on my body that I got back in 2014. God, I feel old. But, kind of looking at some of that older material that had really good thematic elements that would still be appropriate for second edition and adapting it not only from a rules perspective, but if you need to change something because, one power or something is really problematic, Perfidy, I'm looking at you. But being able to kind of change it and adapt it to fit the better themes and also, back that up with story reasons. I would love to see stuff like that.
I love that.
It's a lot of really good things that we can get to potentially bring back and, and improve. Just like, doing second editions of games like this does that. And, we can just kind of keep iterating on that. And I'm honestly looking forward to seeing what comes up in the future.
Hell yes. I'm going to jump over to Josh, and then we're going to do some quick fire questions from the audience because we've had a couple. And thank you so much for Travis to putting them in our Zoom as well. So Josh, you mentioned that you worked on a novella for Vampire the Requiem. Was it a novella or a short story?
Well, for Vampire, it was a long short story, and for Deviant, it was a short novella, of very similar lengths. But
okay. Well, I want to ask you a little bit about noir, because you mentioned you really love the sort of noir feel of the Chronicles of Darkness. What does noir sort of mean to you, and how does that feeling or tone or mood differ in Vampire and Deviant?
I would say it's I think Rose had put a quote from one of the Philip Marlowe detective novels that was like it was something about like I'm not human tonight, and talking about a world where the wrong thing often happens and not the right, and I'm paraphrasing, but it sets the tone really well of you're just in this kind of world that's terrible and beautiful at the same time. It's a story about not necessarily heroes and villains, although they will occasionally pop up, but really more about desperate people who are put in these situations where they do bad things, and sometimes they make amends, sometimes they don't, sometimes they just try and survive. It's a certain it's just a certain kind of gaudy dinginess to the setting. I think it's very visceral. I think that was a big thing with going into Requiem. I wrote the clan Splats for that, and it was more about getting visceral feel than specific lore, and it was just a texture, something very tangible and immediate. As far as differences between that and Deviant, I think, they're both games where you are potentially trying to hold on to your humanity or what you were, but in Deviant, you're working against the others that hurt you. In Vampire, you might not have as easy a target as that, and in fact, you're the thing that's doing the hurt. You're kind of predisposed to being predatory, or just at least opportunistic, and they kind of cross into each other, but I think the Vampire is more about you are set to be a predator, whereas in Deviant you have this hurt, and what do you do with that?
Cool.
Yeah.
I loved your comment about texture. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that, if you would, like sort of how to get like texture in your writing and how to sort of pull that across to your reader.
You can definitely see that in the discipline descriptions in Requiem Second Edition. There is a just sort of malignance to the powers, just every bit of it. In Masquerade, you could look at something like looking at someone's aura, and it has a spooky connotation because it's a supernatural predator that's doing it, but it's this sort of psychic power. In Requiem, all the powers just are like, no, you see someone's weaknesses, or every ounce of the powers are have this sort of like, you make the world this nastier place every time you open that up.
Mhm.
And it's not about this sort of monolithic mythology of these ancient monsters that are hanging over everything, which I love in Masquerade. But in this, it's more about it's something more mysterious and nebulous. Like the blood itself seems to like have a will of its own. It's almost its own kind of cosmic horror thing, especially if you dig into, well, second edition, but even before that, the clan books really kind of got into this, where it's just this sense that something really nasty is happening with the blood that's beyond the vampire's control. It's like its own, almost this crawling, seeping entity, and it just kind of, it fills in every little aspect of that. But as far as texture in like the clan splats, it was more about giving quick examples of like, you could be this, you could be this, you could be this, as opposed to this is the history of the clan. It's more about tonight. Requiem is more about tonight, whereas Masquerade is often about the shadows of things from the past kind of hanging over. But obviously both games can be played more like the other, depending on the storyteller that's running it, the group that's running it. You can borrow and mix it up, but that's kind of the presets of both settings.
Do you think that immediacy of sort of focusing on playing a monster who could be ancient or could have been born yesterday sort of makes a game like that feel more visceral?
Yeah, and it was a neat departure. One thing we did with the second edition that I really liked was this sense that an elder could wake up and be almost new again. The blood can thin out again. Instead of this just kind of gradually becoming powerful and being set in your ways, like technology is weird to you. Elders could thin their blood out, wake up, and then they're almost like toddlers, learning really quickly, and that's scary. Like a toddler can pick up a smartphone and instantly start to learn things that an older person is having trouble with.
Right.
And the fact that this ancient creature could kind of wake up, forget a lot about their past, and then just start picking things up like that it was different than what was being presented with vampires, where it was just generally understood that I'm an old vampire. Technology scares me and I'm getting less receptive to things, but I'm getting more powerful. Where in Requiem, it's this weird kind of this
Neuroplasticity almost.
Yeah, plasticity is a perfect word for that. Just it opened up neat new avenues that I hadn't considered before in my Masquerade games.
Awesome. And of course, the last question for you: if you could add, change, or remove anything from the Chronicles of Darkness, what would that be?
I think it'd be go back to some of the fiction. Most recently, the deviant novella Dearly Bleak. I really love my little Dearly. He's a little adorable boy with tentacle fingers and eats brains, and he has like scary psychic powers. He falls into my wheelhouse of horror adorable, which is really where that's where I fit in mostly. I write a lot of like dark, serious horror and this and that, or comedic things. But like when there's that mix of horror with heart, that's usually where I do best at. I would love to explore more things with Dearly, or even go way back to my novel Strangers in the Proportion, which from all the way back in 2011. I'd like to go back and revisit those characters, maybe see what they're doing 10 or 12 years later.
Awesome. Well, I do have a question for you all before we go into chat questions. So chat, as a reminder, if you would like to ask questions, we've gotten several already, which are awesome. Please highlight your question by spending 100 of your chat points, or spend 300 to make us hydrate, because we need a reminder to be sipping on that water. It's very important. So something I love in all Chronicles of Darkness games is what I refer to as secondary splats, which are your ghouls for your vampires, your kinfolk for your werewolves, your fey touched for changelings, etc. What is your favorite and why?
Ghouls, hands down. Admittedly, for me, a lot of it comes down to, kind of personal experience, and I'm very, I've got that nostalgia for it. Oh, it's hydrate time. And honestly, some of the best roleplay experiences I've gotten in Chronicles of Darkness games has been specifically playing as someone's ghoul and then found out, oh wait, that one's competent, and then basically the bidding war that starts literally sometimes within, within the same group of PCs. At which point, we got the players themselves kind of roll back and go like, okay, how do we make this a good story for everyone, as opposed to just, the kind of, standard PvP where everybody ends up just feeling terrible about it. But yeah, ghouls are definitely out there. Before I go too far, I actually want to circle back to a comment that Josh made about horror adorable. That was actually a little bit of the aesthetic I went through when I was actually writing the character creation section for Beasts of Primordial, because you've got this character who's like this little old lady who's, kind of the terror of the neighborhood, but she's just very sweet. She can, use her knitting needles as weapons, that kind of thing. But you wouldn't think it.
I love it.
It's like that very sweet, adorable, like visage in this, and like, absolutely terrifying.
Awesome. Eric or Josh?
I wrote or helped create the fractals in Demon, which were from the Heirs of Hell little supplement. I'm talking about the children of demons. And I think that what fascinated about them is that they have no idea that they're not living a normal childhood. And that's just, there's a level of horror there that really don't get into again until genotypals in Deviant on nearly the level. So yeah, just the idea of growing up without knowing that what you can do is not normal. I mean, this is just like, yeah. Anyway, that sense of alienation just right out of the gate. So it's just hard for me to escape as this just horror.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think it's ghouls for me. It's what I've worked with a lot. My short story Lele in the Strix anthology is from the point of view of a ghoul. And actually, any of these secondary splats are a great trick for, you can play in these games for years, decades even, and the thing you love, it just through familiarity becomes a little bit more mundane. You forget why the vampire is so scary. But when you just, whether it's you're writing fiction or even at the table, if you put the players in the mindset of a ghoul, maybe have them play their own ghouls for a session or describe something from the perspective of that secondary splat, it reminds them why these other creatures are so awe-inspiring and awful and cool, and it's a great trick for that, and it really worked in that fiction. It did a lot of the heavy lifting for me. It just
That's awesome.
Just seeing from that character's perspective.
I'm going to take a minute here and say my favorite are stigmatics right now, because I love the secondary splat that is just, I'm a normal person until I saw something I shouldn't have, and now I am forever changed and I have to keep looking over my shoulder. And I love stigmatics from the God Machine Chronicle. They are hands down. And like, I wrote ghouls for second edition Vampire the Requiem, so nothing against ghouls. I love them. They were my dream project. But stigmatics, I would love to explore more sort of stigmatics in the God Machine Chronicle as a thing. All right, let's get on to some audience questions here. We have, what would you think you'd see if you awakened to a supernal realm? So this is a Mage the Awakening question. I guess pick the supernal realm if you like, or just sort of, as Josh said, give a little bit of texture to it. I'm going to keep saying that because it's so good, and I love the way you described that.
Yarn, lots and lots of yarn. That's at least primarily for me, because one of my major hobbies is fiber arts and knitting and crochet work, and I've done a whole lot of it over the years, and even more over the course of the pandemic. So that kind of, that element of creation, and also having my various friends tell me, you literally, wave a wand and boom, blanket. So, kind of, the more like kind of creation based elements of magic, I think would probably kind of pull in there if I, for whatever reason, I ended up awakening and ended up in a supernal realm for whatever reason. I probably wouldn't even recognize which realm it was when I got there. I would just be like, oh my God, it's all this yarn. I'm going to just nap here forever.
I think if my senses were open up to the supernal, I would see what cats actually are, and I would swear allegiance to them, and they would fly me to the moon on weekends.
I love that.
I think a campus would be the way to go for me. But I think the thing that would be most interesting or the most likely for me is that it would almost all be third person. It'd be watching another person going through what was actually me. This is one of the sort of weird idiosyncrasies about my actual real life dream life is that I often dream in third person. I'm not the person that's the main character. I'm just it's really you can tell I've been involved in writing for a very long time. And most of what I do is third person writing, so it's inescapable.
Mm-hmm. Something that really stuck with me, because I want to go ahead and answer this for myself too, because I like this question, is a line in Equinox Road. Eclipse Phase is a good game, but it's not what we're talking about right now. But Equinox Road, for first edition Changeling the Lost, talks about how Arcadia is both a supernal realm in Mage and is also the realm of the Fae in Changeling, and sort of the idea that a Changeling could take the Mage to the Tower of Arcadia and they build up this thing and then they get there, and why? Now that you've written your name on the tower is useless to you. Hello, motorcycle. But the tower is now useless to you because you've already done the thing you're meant to do. So I loved that image of just this empty tower in the middle of a field of thorns, meaning nothing. And that image is very stuck in my head. So I think that is what I would see if I awakened to a supernal realm. Questions, more questions. Do you guys have a favorite Changeling entitlement? I like a lot of them. Mine is the Charmed Circle from 1E. I'd love to see it adapted for 2E.
Yeah. One of the, I didn't actually get a chance to play a whole lot with Entitlements back when I was playing first edition. That said, the Bishopric of Blackbirds really caught my attention. It's like, oh, you need help? I'll help you, sure. And then you basically, collecting all of these various favors and going around and thinking about the sheer scope of what you could do when you actually try to cash all of those in. Like, it could potentially be something like absolutely world shaking, or it could be something really, really small. But the idea of just, literally being there to help. It kind of has some of the more hopeful elements of the game for me. And also, I've gotten a little less edgy in my old age, and I like helping people.
Love that.
Isn't it?
Thank you. Everyone is blessing me, and I appreciate that because my soul will not be coming out of my body today.
How about breaking a little? No.
Eric or Josh, do you have a favorite Changeling entitlement?
I haven't done enough with Changeling, I'm afraid, to really answer
That's
that.
okay.
I've read just enough to be involved with the Wild West Dark Era and to write the Marshals, Big City Marshals. So
awesome.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've cracked that open. So one isn't coming to mind right now, although Changeling's kind of at the top of my list of ones that games I'd want to work on.
Good choice.
Or Chronicle.
Yeah, as you can tell, I'm very into Changeling.
Was there a Scarecrow themed group or
Yes.
something? I think I remember really liking that, and I think I had a character idea, but I'm blanking on some of the particulars.
I'm trying to remember the name of it. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's the one that you actively scare other Changelings in order to keep them on their toes.
Yeah. At the time that probably
Scarecrow Ministry
really does. Okay, that's it. Yep, that one.
That's awesome. Good choices, everyone. You have not disappointed me. But what else do we have here? So we can't announce new things, but we can talk about things that are currently on the list, the big list. So is there anything you worked on that is coming out that you're excited about people seeing in the Chronicles of Darkness?
That's kind of a bit of a list. I know a lot of folks are excited about Clades and Devoted Companion come out. I won't get into those. I've spoiled them last year. I know that I'm in the process of I'm doing development on the Tending the Flame expansion for Hunter. And I'm really excited to show off all of the new conspiracies and compacts, because there are a lot of new conspiracies and compacts in that little book.
Yeah. I personally am very excited for the Devoted book to come out for Deviant, because I got to write the first chapter and it was really wonderful. And being able to think about people who decided, wow, these people did horrible things to me. They're my mommy now. That was a really fun headspace to explore. So, Josh or Renee?
Whatever the next thing y'all hire me for.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's been a minute since I've had a chance to work on Chronicles of Darkness stuff, and I've met so many amazing, wonderful people, including folks on this panel, specifically through my work on that. And I would love to kind of have an opportunity to kind of play in that space again. So I'm taking work.
I don't have any Chronicle stuff in the pipeline at the moment, but that will hopefully happen soon as the baby gets a little bit bigger. Get back to more of that. But I do currently in Vampire the Masquerade. I have some material in Trails of Ash and Bone, which is a collection of Chronicle stories tied to Cult of the Blood Gods, and that I wrote a story for. And I'm just fascinated to hear back from people that run it, because I have these story tentpoles set up, and I'm just really interested what happens when that hits the prism of someone else's brain and all the variations that might occur.
All right, we have time for this last question, and then we will wrap up. From all of the Chronicles of Darkness creatures and settings, so Splats, which 2 or 3 do you think mix well? Try to keep your answers short here. If I had to pick any 2 or 3, I would definitely go with Deviant, Promethean, Demon.
Oh my gosh. Dang it, you're not supposed to steal my idea. those are a good combination. I agree.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm biased, but beast in anything else, because that's literally what the game was built for. And I've worked on more than a few beast books, and definitely had a lot of fun talking about the various kinships they have with other supernatural creatures in the in-game universe. And I would love to see more people kind of play with that. So, you know, depending on the type of game you want to run, if you want to kind of go for more kind of, you know, cerebral adventures, you could potentially go with, you know, like mage or demon, or if you want to, you know, basically go out there and rip face. I mean, there are plenty of options for that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking protagonist and antagonist, it's fun to do Deviant Hunter, because those two Splats really should be friends, but definitely aren't most of the time, I'm sure, because it just, yeah.
I think the Deviant Promethean combo is really cool as friends, because it's this sort of tragic relationship where one is slowly losing the thing that the other is slowly gaining, and it's just like
Also, the idea of putting a deviant on a refinement, anyone?
Ooh. See, now I got to play all these games.
But yeah, that was a really good final question. Actually, I like that as a final question. Thank you all so much for coming to our panel. We're going to start wrapping up now. If you just want to give yourselves a quick 10 to 15 second plug, we'll start with Josh, and we'll go to Eric, and then we will have Renee last but certainly not least.
Yeah, it's easy to reach me on Twitter at the tag below my video right now. I've got some stuff coming out or is out. It's all a blur. Pugmire Squeaks from the Deep, which is more horror adorable stuff. the Trail of Ash and Bones, like I said, and various other things. But yeah, come reach out to me at Twitter, and I will happily answer any questions.
Hell yeah. Eric?
I'm on the Discord for both the fan one and the official Onyx Path Discord. Check me, chat with me, ask me questions. It's actually kind of appalling how much it inspires me to work on stuff when I just hear people get excited about stuff that I'm working on.
And Renee?
I am Hedgie Cleric pretty much everywhere, including here on Twitch. So, Twitter, Instagram, I've got a Facebook page. That's usually the best place to find me. That's actually also part of my Discord handle. But I'm here and I'm making stuff. It's Worldwide Knit in Public Day, so I've been working on this through the course of the panel.
I am Jax. You can follow me almost anywhere as Rufflejax. You probably have seen my work in Changeling, Deviant, Demon, a whole bunch of other stuff. I talk a lot about how Changeling the Lost saved my life. It's a very important game to me, and I'm super happy that I got to be on this panel because I love talking about Chronicles of Darkness. So definitely come hit me up on the internet. Travis, I think that's time. So let us know when you want us to say goodbye. All right. Mwah, mwah. Good night, everyone.
All right.
Good night.